And she leads our campaign to work with congregations and congregational cohorts around the state to reduce energy usage 25% over the next 3 years. So if your congregation isn't signed up yet for Thriving Faith Communities, or is looking and is interested, please talk to her and send her a chat. I know she would love to talk with you. And then I think Ray is connecting in, and he's our board chair. So feel free, if you have any questions along the way, to get in touch with any of us. We also, our administrative director, Angie, sends her regards, and our Green Team organizer, Elsa Barron, is in DC. She didn't make it to the protests, Indigenous-led protest this week, Sawyer, but she's there doing some peace and climate work right now. So all good news on that. So I just wanted to start by sharing total gratitude and appreciation for all of you who were at this summit. We just held our Faith Climate Summit and fundraiser a couple weeks ago. I know John was there, and John helped us with their composting effort, and Amber was there, and it was just such a joy to get to learn and connect in person, and to join one another together in climate action and a call for climate justice. So our theme for the summit was a just transition, combating climate change, environmental degradation, and injustice in the state of Indiana. And today we're going to get to continue that conversation with Miss Diane Hunter of the Miami Nation. We'll learn a little bit more about what it means to honor Indigenous communities in our work and to listen to their stories and knowledge as we work towards a just and sustainable world. Because as we know, the impacts of both climate change and environmental degradation impact and intersect with other forms of structural injustice, especially with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, urban and rural poor, and other vulnerable communities, not only bearing the front of these environmental and health consequences, but also being the voice for real knowledge about how we can approach these. And we look forward to hearing from Diane in a little bit. And then we'd also just love to start out a little introductions to know where everyone's coming from. So in the chat, if you are able, we'd love for you to add your name. Well, you have your name. If you're not, I think everybody's got their name, but maybe your name, 3 words about your spiritual or faith tradition in the comments section, and where in Indiana or what congregation you are joining us from today. So just so we know a little bit about everybody. And there's not a huge group, so just share a little bit. Maybe three words of inspiration about your spiritual or faith tradition. All right, so Sarah from St. Teresa of Little Flower Catholic Church in Indianapolis. And John, so great, thank you so much. And then we are going to start out with an invocation. We like to ground ourselves as well. And we welcome Jerry Reardon, the lead pastor at Noblesville First UMC, to give the invocation today. We are so grateful to UMC for hosting our Faith Climate Summit at Teeter Retreat and Organic Farm, which, if you haven't been out there, Noblesville is a really special place. Their farm manager, Katie, does an incredible job with sustainable agriculture, and also they have a CSA and really connect agriculture as a voice for faith action around supporting local food and supporting the community. So we really are just so grateful for you all, and thank you, Pastor Reardon, for centering us today.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming out to Teeter. It's fun to see everybody out there, and we're very proud of that opportunity. It's a blessing that we've had for many years, but it wasn't until 4 years ago that one of our pastors came back from a training event with the new idea of the organic farm. And so we've had a lot of fun living into that, and it's doing extremely well. And I think this year we'll be donating 20,000 servings of food to Hamilton County Food Pantry. So we're pleased with that. I must confess that I'm a little humbled that I'm asked to do this invocation. Amber reached out to me to do this, and I look from afar at your work. I get your emails, and I'm thankful for what you do. But as Amber can attest, I spent a lot of my time working for inclusion with our denomination in the state of Indiana. And then locally, we've had quite the work as far as racism with our local community. And so we're part of the pastors and the community members and students that are trying to make sure that that voice is heard, that all persons of color are respected. And so that's where I put most of my energy. So I don't come with a whole lot of expertise. And so as I prayed about what I should do, I thought, well, I'll just turn to the internet, and came across a Native American prayer that I thought would speak better than anything I could come up with on short notice. So I'd like to share a prayer, and I just want to share this for all of you, the work that you do. I know it parallels what I'm doing in many ways, and things can get very frustrated. It seems like I can't hardly say anything these days without getting an email in opposition. So there's a lot of conflict to manage, a lot of struggle to face, and still be true to what you feel God is calling us to do. So I'd like to share this prayer, which I think you'll find nurturing. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and just relax, and may this be a gift to you. This is actually written by a Native American, Josie Hobday, and it's called the 3-Step Morning Prayer. So please relax and let me walk you through this carefully and slowly, and hopefully it'll be nourishing to your soul. So first step, plant your feet firmly on the earth. Using your 5 senses, give thanks to our Creator God for the countless ways God comes to us through creation, for all the beauty that your eyes see, for all the sounds that your ears hear, for all the scents that you smell, the taste that you taste, for all that you feel, the sun, wind, rain, snow, warm or cold. Pray this day that you may be open and attuned to the countless ways that our Creator God comes to us through your senses, through the gifts of creation. Second step, let go of all the pain, the struggle, the regret, the failures, the angry emails, the garbage of yesterday. Step out of it, leave it behind. Brush the dust of it from your feet. Third step. With this third and final step, step into the gift of the new day, full of hope, promise, and potential. Give thanks for the gift of this new day, which God has made. Amen.
Amen. Wow. Thank you very, very much. So now we're going to continue that work. And I really appreciate that, first of all, because I think a lot of times we lose that ability to center ourselves. We're constantly thinking about what's next. And I just really appreciate you helping ground us in that way. So a couple of additional announcements before we transition to the real meat or tofu of today's call. And so again, I just wanted to thank you all for coming out and supporting our summit. If you didn't get a chance to attend in person, you can check out a video of our summit, although Molly did indicate that it was a little hard to hear. So if you really want to get into the crux of the conversation, just feel free to reach out and we can have a one-on-one too and talk more about it. And if you were in attendance and didn't get a chance to fill out our survey, we do have a survey available for those folks who just want to give us feedback so we can make it even better next year. Elsa Barron, in addition to being in DC, she's our traveling representative around the world. She's our Hippo Green Team organizer, and will be attending the United Nations Climate Change Conference called COP26 in Glasgow, which is coming up in just a couple weeks. And she will be there as a Christian climate observer. The summit is actually bringing together people from all over the world to accelerate climate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And she'll be reporting back to us through our Facebook, through Facebook Live events and a social media takeover. So feel free to look at our Facebook page for that. And as part of COP26, Hoosiers of Faith, we're calling on everyone to tell our leadership that we need to take action in the halls of Indiana leadership. So as many of you know, we've been working to collect signatures on our Faith Climate Declaration. We're looking to get 1,000 signatures. We are, I think, over 650, but we still have a ways to go. So if everyone on this call could get, 20 or 30 signatures, we'd be well on our way to making that goal happen. And in addition, we are looking for faith leaders to hand deliver this to Governor Holcomb's office over the time that COP26 is happening, which is the week of November 5th through the 12th. So if you or a clergy member that you know are interested in doing this, please let us know. So you can either help get signatures on that declaration, or you can actually join us in person. And we want to find a time that our faith leaders are available. So feel free to have them reach out to us with that. Saturday, November 6th, down in Taubstad, Indiana, there's a regenerative agricultural forum called the Next Steps for Soil Health and Climate Mitigation. You can register online. Sarah will put that link in the chat. And also they're recruiting farmers, landowners, and partners interested in improving soil health and reducing crop costs and fertilizer runoff, building resilience to extreme weather events, and moderating climate change. It's underwritten, so there's no fees to attend. And I think that there's food, free food and all that. So if you, a farmer or a neighbor, friend is interested, please share that link with them. Are there any more announcements from our affiliates or from your green teams? I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to share. All right. So with that, we're going to transition now to our conversation with Diane Hunter. We are just so grateful to welcome her she's from the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the federally recognized Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. And the Miami have deep ties to the Wabash River Valley and were forcibly removed from this land. So it's actually interesting, but the land that we were on for our summit is historical Miami land. And Diane will share us a bit about the history, traditions, and stories of the Miami tribe, and then we'll have some time for conversation about what we can learn from the community and as it relates to just transition moving forward. So Diane, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'll try to share my screen here. Are you seeing just the screen? No. Okay, good. Aya, te pewe neola kakoke o wahanungi katikwe. Checha kokwa wenzriane, nilimita senia miamiquia. Seka kweka ne palanzwa elapakasiane. I just spoke to you in Miamiata Wenge, the Miami language, and I just said hello. It's good to see all of you here today. My name is Diane Hunter, and I am a citizen of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, and I descend from Sekaqueta and Palanzwa, who are also known as the Godfroys. And I am honored to serve my nation as Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. So, as Dory said, I'll talk a little bit about our history, and then about our tribe today. And I probably won't begin to answer all the kinds of questions you might have, so I'll see what I can do as you ask questions afterward. So I like to begin at the beginning. Mitame, miamiake, nipangonje, sakachawaicheke. At first, the Miamis came out of the water. Now that's the first line of our oldest story. It's the story of our emergence as Miami people. We don't know exactly where we came from before our emergence. We believe, based on some of our stories, that we came from the north, but we don't know exactly where. We don't know who we were before. But when we came out of the water, we were a unique and different people and came to call ourselves Miamiake, or Miami people. The place where we came out of the water, we called Sakiweonge. You can see it here. It's somewhere on the St. Joseph River between South Bend and Lake Michigan. We established a village there. We lived there. We don't know how long. We have lived in Indiana and surrounding areas since time immemorial. And we lived at Sakiweonge for a period of time, and eventually people started leaving. They would go in small groups in different directions. Usually that happened when a village became too large to be sustained, that we didn't have enough, we couldn't grow enough crops, we didn't have enough plants and not enough hunting in the area. And so some people would leave and move on to another place. And so, as you see on this map, eventually we had a number of villages. These aren't all our villages, but they're the ones that are best known today. Probably one of our best known villages is Kikaonga, where I am right now in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And then many of our other villages were along the Wapashike-Sipiwe, the Wabash River. Our villages were almost always on rivers, and we particularly liked confluences because those rivers could sustain us. They were water, they were fish for us to eat, there were plants along the rivers, they were transportation. We grew our corn along the rivers because the rivers would deposit rich soil. And we all know that corn depletes the soil and you have to do something. But if that soil is replenished by the rivers, then you don't have to worry about that. And of course, we didn't have to worry about runoff from the farms to make that soil bad. So rivers were very important to us from the very beginning. As I said from the beginning, we came out of the water. So water has always been important to us as Miami people. I'm often asked, well, what about Miami's connection to nature? And the first thing you have to understand is it's not like we think of today. Our connection with nature was not environmentalism or ecology, save the planet. That was not our approach to nature. Nature was where we lived. It was our home. We had homes, we built homes, but our homes, which we called, our home would be a wikiami, and a wikiami was where we slept and where we kept our stuff. But otherwise, we were living in nature. We don't even have in our language words for indoors and outdoors. The concept of being indoors or outdoors just didn't exist for us. But of course, we took care of nature, took care of our environment. We take care of our homes today. We want it to look beautiful. We want our home to be safe and sturdy, and we don't want it crumbling. We don't want the roof to fall in on us. In much the same way, that's how we approach nature. We took care of nature so that it would take care of us, so that it could provide us the plants we needed and the animals we needed for food and for making everything. Everything that we had was made from something natural, whether it was plants, animals, stone, whatever. It was all from nature. And so to do that, we had to take care of it. Controlled burns in the forest were not at all uncommon, because we understood that that's how the forest would grow better, by these controlled burns, and grow the plants that we needed for our own use. Now, our villages would have been along the rivers at these confluences, but also in the forests as they approach the rivers. Our village life was divided. Men and women had separate roles within our villages. The men's role was primarily outside of the village. The men did the hunting, they did most of the fishing. The men did the trading. When they would trade with other tribes, and later with the French and the British and the Americans, that was the men's role to do that. The men were the ones who made war, and they were the ones who made peace. So they were not within the village much of the time. But within the village, that was the women's area. And we built our homes. The men might help with saplings. Saplings would be stretched into a dome-shaped frame. And so the men might help with that. But the walls of our houses were made from cattails. We take the cattail reeds and they would be sewn together, as you see in this picture. And those made the walls of our homes, and that the women did that. The women made everything that we had, everything that we needed, even to the extent that if the men wanted to go to war and the women didn't want them to, the men wouldn't have the supplies that they would need to go, because the women would say, no, we're not supplying you with these things that we have made. So that even though there was a divided responsibility, there was a shared responsibility in terms of decision making. Our women were our farmers. Every village had a large cornfield with Miami, it's today called Miami corn, we called it Minjipe. And so there was one large cornfield for every village. And the women and the children would plant the corn. And then usually at harvest time, everybody had to pitch in because that was a big job. Each family also had a garden, beans and squash. And then the women and children would also go out and gather wild plants, roots, lily pads, milkweed. My grandmother loved milkweed. And then the women would prepare the food as well. So you can see that there was everything that needed to be done was somebody's job. And nobody's work was considered valueless because it was all necessary for our life. So this is the way we lived for, well, since time immemorial. But then in the mid-1600s, there were the Beaver Wars. And we were not happy to be in the midst of that. And so we fled west into what is today Illinois, and then north into what is today Wisconsin. But around 1700, we felt it was safe and we came back to our homes here in what is now Indiana. And we continued to live our lives with some differences, but pretty much the same. While we were in Illinois and Wisconsin, we had encountered the French and we're trading with them. And so they followed us back to Indiana. So we continued trading with the French. In the mid-1700s, we also started trading with the British. We really liked European goods. If you can imagine your whole life cooking in a clay pot that if you made one false move, you trip and you drop it, and not only does the food spill, but the whole pot breaks. And now you got metal pots to cook in, and they don't break. And yeah, and they cook better than clay pots. So we were very happy to have a lot of the trade goods that we got. Our lives changed drastically after the Treaty of Paris, 1783, and that was the treaty in which at the end of the American Revolutionary War. And in that treaty, the British ceded their claim to our land, what we considered Miami-Onge, the place of the Miami. They ceded that to the Americans, and the Americans saw it as their land. But we had not been part of that treaty. We had not sold our land. We had not given our land. We had not ceded our land. And as far as we were concerned, it was still ours. But the Americans were coming onto our land. Think about if someone came onto your property and cut down your trees and build a house on your property. You would probably do exactly what we did, get them off. They don't belong here. We don't want them. Get them out of here. But of course, that led to skirmishes. We attacked them, they attacked us, and skirmishes eventually led to war. And the result of the war was ultimately the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. Now in this treaty, as you can see, we ceded most of what is today Ohio and some portions of present-day Indiana. That was supposed to be good. It was going to bring us peace. It was going to have, we were going to share the territory. They have their land, we have ours, and we're going to live as good neighbors. But the Americans kept coming, and as they came into southern Indiana, they wanted us to cede more and more land. And so we had more and more treaties, and there was a treaty of 1805, the Treaty of 1809. Now, if you recall, Indiana became a state in 1816. What you're seeing here, that was Indiana in 1816. All the rest of this was still Miami-Onge. It was still our land. But then in 1818, we ceded a large part of central Indiana. And then 1826, we ceded most of what was north of the Wabash River. In 1834, we ceded some of the small parcels that we still had remaining. After the Treaty of 1838, the only tribal land that we had was the Great Miami Reserve. Kokomo today is right in the middle of the Great Miami Reserve. And we did have private land. Some Miami people owned private property, but this was the only tribal land, a little less than 500,000 acres that we had. And then in 1840, we signed a treaty exchanging the Great Miami Reserve for land, was supposed to be about the same size west of the Mississippi River. And even more significantly, in that treaty, we agreed to be removed to that land west of the Mississippi. Well, no one wanted to go. Everyone wanted to stay. One of the arguments over all of these treaties, they had been trying to get us to go west. And one of the arguments was, we can't leave our ancestors behind. Our ancestors are buried here. We can't leave them behind. But now we were going to have to, and we did not want to. So we came up with reasons why we couldn't go. We had 5 years to remove. We can't go this year because we have to harvest our crops. We can't go this year because we have to sell our land. We own private land. If we left it behind, we would lose it. So we kept coming up with reasons why we can't go now, we can't go now. Well, the 5 years passed. In October 1846, now that is exactly 175 years ago now, the US Army came to our villages, rounded us up from our villages, and took us to a prison camp in Peru, Indiana. On October 6, 1846, 5 canal boats with about 325 Miami people on board left Peru and took the Miami and Erie Canal east through Fort Wayne and into Ohio. We switched to the Miami and Erie Canal, which we took down to Cincinnati. From Cincinnati, we took steamboats on the Ohio, the Mississippi, and the Missouri rivers, arriving on November 1st at what is today Kansas City. From there, we went overland about 50 miles south to the Miami Reservation on Sugar Creek in what is today Kansas. Now, it had been a difficult journey. 2/3 of us had been sick on the journey. 7 had died, 6 children and 1 elder man. And when we arrived in our new reservation, it was unusually cold for early November. There were no houses for us. We had to live in tents. We were all still sick. And between October 6th, when we left Peru, and the end of 1846, at least 30 Miami people had died. So that's about 10% of those of us who left on this removal route died as a result of the removal. The land was different. Indiana, especially in northern Indiana at the time, 80% was still forested, 20% prairie. When we got to the new reservation, it was 80% prairie and 20% forest. 80% of the food, the plants that we had used for food in Indiana were either not available in Kansas, or they were available in such small quantities that they really weren't enough for us to be able to use. Every year we had gone maple sugaring in the late winter, early spring. That was a part of our diet, was to tap the maple tree sap and make maple syrup and maple sugar. There was a stand of sugar maples on the eastern edge of our tribal reserve on the border with Missouri. That was all we had in terms of maple trees to make sugar. So it was quite different. The first year we were eating government supplied food, which was quite different for us. And the change was physically and spiritually, emotionally different. It's not like home to us at all. But then we started building our houses. We continued growing corn. It's a different growing season, but we had to figure that out. And eventually we started businesses. We had a mill, we had a blacksmith. We wanted to create a better life for our children. And after a while, it was a better life. Things were really good for a while, until the Americans arrived again, and things were not so good then. After the Civil War, the US government wanted us to remove a second time, this time south to Indian Territory. So this was our reservation in what is now Kansas. There's the Missouri state line. So this was our reservation here. And we went south to Indian Territory, to northeastern part of what is today Oklahoma. Took us about 15 years for all of us to remove. We didn't go all together as we had with the first move to Kansas. Environmentally, Indian Territory was even more different from Kansas than Kansas was from Indiana. There were no sugar maples. We became cattle ranchers in some cases. By now, our men are the farmers. The first few years, they didn't do very well because they didn't know what they were doing. It was women's work and they didn't know so much about farming, but they learned. And Indian Territory became our home. Now I'm going to jump way ahead in time to 1936. Under the Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act, we reorganized the tribe as a federally recognized tribe called the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. And in 1939, we ratified our Constitution. Now, the tribe went west, but there were a few families who by treaty or by legislation were allowed to stay in Indiana. And there was a lot of back and forth between Indiana and Kansas, Indiana and Oklahoma. But with the Constitution in 1939, only those who were allotted land in Oklahoma and their descendants were permitted to be citizens of the tribe. But in 1996, the tribe amended that Constitution to allow essentially anyone who is a Miami descendant, who has Miami ancestors, can now be citizens of the tribe. But we are a divided people. We have people in Oklahoma, in Kansas, in Indiana. Well, really, we have citizens all over the United States and internationally. And what happens when we're so spread out, so divided, is a cultural loss. We assimilate to the culture around us and we lose much of what was our culture. Our last native speakers of our language died in the 1960s. But today we are revitalizing. In the 1990s, we started learning our language again. We started learning about our culture and we started teaching it to our children. Today we are learning our language. We even have some very young children today who are learning to speak Miamiata Wenge at the same time they're learning to speak English. I find that very encouraging. I firmly believe that in another couple of generations, we again will have native speakers of our Miamiata Wenge, of our Miami language. Our seat of government is in Miami, the town of Miami, Oklahoma, and we are a sovereign nation. We gather together several times a year. Well, under normal circumstances, we gather together several times a year. We are learning our traditional stories again. We tell those stories. We are learning to play games that we used to play. Lacrosse is a native game. The Iroquois claim that they invented it. I'm happy to let them claim that, but we all learned it and we all played it, and we are still playing it today. Other games that we've been playing since time immemorial, we are still playing today. We are learning to make ribbon work, which is sewing art. Excuse me. You see on the side of my slide an example of a pattern from a piece of ribbon work. So my work as Tribal Historic Preservation Officer is about our identity. It's about who we are as a people. It's about our way of life, our unique perspective. It's tied to our language, our stories, our history. It's about leaving something for the next generations. Mishinewe, thank you for listening, and I'm open to whatever questions you have.
Wow, thank you so much, Diane. That was really enlightening for many of us who have not heard that story before and the history of the community. I wanted to start out, just start asking questions, and then we'll open the floor for everyone to join. That, you know, we kind of learned a little bit about the values that you talked about, how there was no difference between outside and inside, and that there was no separation between us and our environment, that the Miami really lived in symbiosis with their environment. So thinking about ways that we are transitioning to in this future paradigm, I think what kind of values and practices can we take with us from the Miami people, and what does a just and sustainable future look like for you and the Miami?
That's a big, two big questions there. So I think, you know, we don't live as we did, obviously, and Miami people don't live as we did, and yet we can look at how we lived and appreciate what the natural world was to us. And we can recognize that that natural world is not the same anymore. 80% forest. It's not 80% forest here anymore. And so just understanding, yes, things change, but these were changes that were deliberately made. We lived in the world that we were given. And people came in and attempted to change it, to meet their needs, but without considering what is the ultimate result of this. This is what I need today. This is what I want so I can feed my family, so I can get rich, so I can whatever. And I think just thinking about if we treated nature like we do our houses, you know, we keep our houses, most of us anyway, I think, we keep our houses, as I said, so that they support our lives, so that we have a viable place to live. If we treated nature the same way, I think we would be looking at things quite differently. For us as Miami people, our efforts over the last 25, 30 years have really been about revitalization, of re-looking at who we are and how we've lived and how we can live today as Miamiake, as Miami people. And so we're taking that a piece at a time. We have some people who know more about, certainly know a lot more about the plants that we used and what we ate. And you know, some people could tell you, I can tell you that we took those cattail reeds and made them into the walls of our homes. Some people can say, and yes, and we used this part for that, and we used that part for that. So we do still have some memory of that. And so that's part of our revitalization, to restore that. To learn how do we use the plants that we had before and use them today. Growing minjipe, we still have minjipe, Miami corn, but it's really hard to find a place to grow it because you can't grow it anywhere near other cornfields, because then it gets hybridized and then you don't have minjipe anymore. And so things like that, looking at how do we live in the environment we have, but maintaining those things that have always been important to us.
It really is a story of resiliency and adaptation and the ultimate.
Yes.
I have more questions, and I also want to open up the space for others. So if you'd like to, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute and share a question. So while folks are thinking, our organization is composed mainly of non-native settlers in the state of Indiana. And how can we continue to tangibly work towards environmental justice and decolonization? And that's a big one too. We hit them hard.
I've got the solutions to all your problems here.
Sure. And maybe that's part of this conversation self-examination as well.
I mean, what you're doing right now, inviting me to come talk to you, is an important part of it. I mean, most people in Indiana really do not know the story, the history of Miami people in this state. I mean, we still have people looking our children in the face and saying Indians are extinct in Indiana. They need to understand that, no, we're not extinct. Our past is here, but so is our present and so is our future, because we are not a people of the past. We are a living people. And that's just recognizing who we are and recognizing who we were and how we lived and understanding that and acknowledging that. People don't need to feel guilty about what their ancestors did. I don't intend to feel guilty about some of the things my ancestors did either, but there is justice in acknowledging that these things happened and how can we avoid them happening again.
Sawyer, yeah.
Thank you, Diane, just for your presence and for your willingness to share with us. It's really enlightening. What you shared and the way you shared it was really moving to me. And I was remembering a moment when you were talking about how there are currently young ones in Miami, young ones who are learning English at the same time as they're being taught the native language. And I guess I wondered just if you could say a few more words about what that means to you. What does that mean to you that there is this revitalization possibility of native speakers returning to the Miami people?
We didn't learn the language in my generation. My dad's generation did not learn the language. My grandmother, we didn't know that she knew any of it until she was in her late 70s and she was interviewed, and the interviewer got her to say some words in our language. And when we listened to the recording, we didn't know, but she was restrained from using it. It was not safe for her to speak the language as she became an adult and lived through her adult life. But as our children learn that language, they're honoring her. They're honoring her and they're honoring all the people who came before us. They're saying, yes, you weren't allowed. You weren't allowed to speak your own language, but we're doing it for you. And we are going to sustain ourselves as Miami people. You can't sustain a culture without a language. You can't understand a culture without the language. And these children they're going to have a different worldview because they know our language from the beginning.
Any other questions? Oh, Amber, yeah.
Diane, thank you for coming today. My questions for you are, do you still have stories and ceremonies or rituals that remind you of who you are, where you came from, and your connection to the land? And of that, is there anything you would want to share with us here that we might also be able to share with others?
We have stories. Most of the stories that we have are what we call winter stories, because they can only be told in the winter. We have some history stories, like the story that I started out telling at the beginning. That's a history story. It's a real event that took place in a real time in a real place with real people. Our winter stories are about animals. They're about other than human beings. And we just don't tell those, and we don't tell them outside of our tribal community. But the history stories we can tell at any time. But those stories, they connect us back. They help us understand, again, who we were and who we are today. It's truly a blessing that we have those stories, because they so easily could have been lost when everything else was going to sleep. But around the turn of the 20th century, a couple of linguists, ethnographers started interviewing Miami people, and they wrote down, my great-grandfather was one of the people that they interviewed, and they wrote down, he worked with them to write down a small dictionary of our language. And he told the stories. That first story, the story of our emergence, we have that because he told. And the story ends, he ends it by saying, "This is how my mother's told me. My mother, Seka Kweta, and her older sister, Wapangikwa." So this is a story that has been passed down, and he should never have told these stories. None of them should have told these stories. They were not to be shared. But if they hadn't, we wouldn't have them today. So I'm so grateful that they did. And it makes the connection. I was talking to a woman just a week or so ago. She descends from the Wapangikwa in that story. And she didn't know that her ancestor Wapangikwa was the Wapangikwa in that story. These are our lives. These are our families. And so having these stories means so much to us, and it means so much to our children to have that connection. My son grew up knowing who his 5 generations back, he could tell you who they were. Now he knows a whole lot more than that, but the stories help us connect to them. We don't have a lot of ceremonies. The one thing we do have is the pekomata, which is our funeral rite. And we have the words for that. And so we can use that when Miami people pass. But we don't have a lot of knowledge. I think there's probably more out there to be learned. It's one of those areas that has not been sufficiently explored. And I keep thinking maybe a later project and I can tackle that, because it's important to know. And people, some Miami people continued those practices. Others were when we encountered first the Jesuits, some converted to Catholicism. Later, the Baptists came and some became Baptists, but there were some who maintained that early traditions, but a lot of it then got lost, even from those people. And then there are things we know about our history that we just rather let go. We live in a different time, and there are certain things that are just not what we want anymore.
Well, Diane, I just want to thank you so much again for sharing your story and for helping us kind of bring that story to awareness as we continue to do the work that we're doing. I know that there are more questions. Steve was wondering if, in addition to Kokomo having been ancestral key lands, the Miami relate to the mounds around Anderson, Indiana, and some other questions. I want to acknowledge that we are at time. Diane, is it okay if we connect you with folks if they're have additional questions?
Absolutely, yeah. You can share my, well, I had my email address up there, but
Okay.
here, I'll put it in the
Yeah.
Yeah, and people are feel free to email me.
And if you would, you made yourself so available to us. I know that if other people have other groups or congregations and they want to share this, that's important work that you.
I'm always happy to talk with groups, yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And just a reminder, our next monthly call will be November 17th. I know we're going to be talking a little bit about sustainable agriculture and really thinking more. I mean, you gave us, Dan, a lot to chew on in terms of how we relate to our land and then how we rely on the land for food. So thank you all for being here tonight and really appreciate it. So we'll talk with you all again soon.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Pastor Airden. Thanks for joining us. All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.